My name is Kim Harms. I'm 68, and I've been around the block a couple of times. I practiced for 30 years as a dentist. I've been a grief counselor, a death doula, a civil mediator, sometimes at the same time. I was the first woman president of the Minnesota Dental Association and a national spokesperson for the American Dental Association for over 20 years. But most importantly, I've had a life that has been challenging. I was born missing some fingers because of thalidomide. I lost my mother and my son to suicide and lost my husband, Jim. Right now, my most important job is as a grandmother to my 6 incredible grandchildren. Every loss was traumatic, and I think anyone that's lost a loved one has been in that pit of grief, where you can't eat, you can't sleep, you can't comprehend, you can't read. I mean, it's a terrible, terrible place to be. Grief is very difficult. And I was at that bottom of that grief pit a number of times. One of the hardest ones was when my son died. That was so unexpected. He was an amazing young man. He was at Columbia University. He was this brilliant National Merit Scholar. First year at Columbia, he was elected to student government, this little guy from Farmington, Minnesota. And he was having the best time of his life. He was playing piano. He was a jazz pianist. He went to Columbia because he could play jazz piano in New York, but study engineering, and everything was going his way. And when he came back from his first semester, he had made the dean's list, and he was so happy. We'd never seen him so happy. But just 2 weeks into his second semester, his girlfriend broke up with him, which is a normal part of life. But that young 19-year-old who was very impulsive, and he was gone in 45 minutes. He was gone. And our lives were just torn to pieces. We didn't know how we were going to get through that. But I had a situation, something that occurred. First of all, I had a tremendous support group. I had family and friends. My church, my faith is very important. They supported me during this time. People reached out to me during this time. But most importantly, I had a nephew, a cousin of my husband's, was standing outside of our dental office, and we were trying to get back to work, which is a hard thing to do after a loss. Going back to work is very difficult to do after a loss. In fact, I lectured for many years in dentistry about how you can do that. And I was trying to struggle. I was trying to survive. And I was in that zombie phase. And anybody that's had a catastrophic loss knows about the zombie phase, where you're dead on the inside and you're trying to look like you're normal on the outside, but you just can hardly get through. So I was going through life in the zombie phase. I was coming out of my office. My husband's cousin, who had been talking to him on the side, came up to me, shaking his finger in my face with a lot of anger in his voice. And he said to me, "Don't you ever let your remaining children feel that they are not enough. Don't you do that to them." And it was like a lightning bolt hit me when he said that, because I realized that he had lost his brother at about the same age as my son Eric was. And he felt that he lost his parents at the same time because they were so consumed with grief over the child they lost. And I knew that I was headed in that same direction. And at that moment, I realized that I could not do that to my 2 remaining daughters and my husband, that I had to fight and kick and scream and get out of that grief pit any way I could. And it took a long time, took years, but eventually I was able to fight my way out of that pit. I was able to breathe the fresh air again. I was able to live in the moment, and I was able to attend to my remaining children and now my 6 grandchildren without that shroud that hangs over you when you've suffered a catastrophic loss. It's hard to get rid of that shroud, but it'll stay there until you basically beat it off. You have to fight it off. And I think my message to people that are out there is that it's worth the battle. It's worth the fight. Don't give in. Just keep fighting. It might take years. Just keep fighting. My husband, Jim, had just had a liver transplant 6 months before Eric died. So he was in a difficult shape to begin with. But they don't give you a new liver if your heart doesn't check out as being healthy. So he had a healthy heart. A year after Eric died, he required quadruple bypass surgery and a valve replacement. And he was in surgery for many, many hours, and we almost lost him. I believe that his heart problems were partly, at least, because he could not manage the grief. If you take a look at the studies that show that when you don't manage grief, it comes out somewhere else. So you see an increase in heart disease, you see an increase in strokes, increase in many other physical issues. So managing your grief is not only important for you, it's important for your family, and it's important for your physical health. My faith, I have to put as number one. I have a faith that I have a God that's forgiving, and I have a faith that I'm going to see my family again. So I have to say that was probably the most important thing for me. I also have a very wonderful support group. 2 days after my husband died, I had a woman, Naomi Rohde, call me and say that even though she had not lost her husband, she's in her 80s, that her fear was losing her husband. That was the biggest fear of her life. Yet friends around her were losing their husbands at a pretty dramatic rate. And so she decided to have a women's support group, a devotional for women who were widows. So 1 week after I lost my husband, I was on a Zoom call with Naomi Rohde and 8 other widows, and we are still meeting 4 years later. I have this support group of people that have been through the same thing. They know the loneliness, they know the difficulties, they know the idea of trying to reinvent yourself and figure out what your purpose is now. All of those things are known by this other group. So I had this support group, and I really recommend that people go out and find support groups, people that have been through the same thing, because you just don't understand what someone's going through unless you've been through it yourself. What I found out after my husband died is that I need to keep busy. And for a number of years, I was busy helping to take care of my grandchildren when they were smaller. And now that they're older, I'm learning to do other things. I'm getting ready to start a podcast. I'm developing a coaching program. I developed an online course for legacy planning. I also paint porcelain. In fact, I've got a couple pieces here that I've painted. I do a lot of porcelain painting. That also keeps me busy. We went to Pompeii one time about 10 years ago, and what I realized was the one thing that lasted for over 2,000 years, even after a volcano covered it up with molten rock and ash, were the tiles and the painting on porcelain and on ceramic tiles. So I developed a fondness for that. I developed a love for that, and that's my hobby that keeps me busy when I'm not doing anything else. So I find for me to this stage of my life that I have to just keep busy with something, and the porcelain painting gives me a wonderful time, a wonderful opportunity to do something I love to do and keeps me busy. Well, I had this amazing opportunity to build memorial libraries for my son in Rwanda through Books for Africa, which is a local Minneapolis company. And when I was there, I found these amazing people that had suffered a genocide. At the time, it was 16 years after the genocide. They had suffered through a genocide. And yet, they had built a safe country through reconciliation, through putting the people that were convicted of the crimes in jail, but then reconciling with them, being determined to do that, forgiving them. What the heck? How do you forgive a genocide, right? It's not an invading army coming in, it's your next door neighbors coming in and killing people. And they did that because they realized if they didn't do it then, their children would grow up in the same horrific environment. When I went to Rwanda, the first thing that happened is when they realized that I was bringing libraries there in honor of my dead son, I was surrounded by these women that had lost their families, and they showed me so much love. And I looked at them and I thought, wow, if they've lost their entire families, most of them. Some of them had lost their entire families and had been infected with AIDS by the killers. I mean, you can't even imagine what they've been through. And yet, look at them. They are showing me love. They are laughing. They're dancing together. How can this be? Because when you're in those early stages, when you're in the grief pit, you think you're never going to be able to laugh again or enjoy life again. And I saw them. I saw the healing that took place, and it helped me. They served as an example for me to do that work and to heal my own life. Well, forgiveness is such a critically important part of life. In the Christian faith, it's like it's a mandate. We are mandated to forgive, which is not always easy. And one of the hard things to do is to forgive yourself. Now, remember, I'm someone who was between a mother who took her own life and a son who took her own life. So you can imagine some of the things I had to deal with that. I blamed myself. What did I do to not prevent this? I don't know if I actually caused it, but could I have prevented this? A lot of guilt, a lot of shame. And I had to really work through that. Now, again, as a person of faith, I can't talk about that without saying that my faith really helped me get through that. But I had to forgive myself, and I had to find that I'm a person of worth, and that I'm enough alone. That's a hard thing to do, especially after you lose your husband. It took time to do that, but that was the first part. Once you forgive yourself, then you can forgive other people as well. And again, in my faith, it's a mandate, so we have to, right? But forgiving people is freeing. I had one of the pastors in Rwanda told me that forgiveness is like the transformation of a butterfly, the metamorphosis from a caterpillar to a butterfly. But through forgiveness, it's like metamorphosis into that butterfly where you can just fly away. It frees your heart, it frees your soul. And it's important to note that you can forgive someone and they might not accept it. Forgiveness and your freedom from forgiveness is not dependent on the other person accepting it. So even if you forgive someone and they don't accept it, at least you have freed yourself from that burden, because having anger or hate towards someone else is a burden on your soul, and you need to free it through forgiveness. The most important thing when you're in that grief pit and you're in the bottom, and I've been in the bottom with my nostril, just trying to suck air, you just think you can't even move on, is to know that it is possible to move out, because you think when you're down there, you're going to be stuck there forever. It takes time. It takes a lot of work and effort. You have to work at it and reach out to other people, reach out for help. I'm treated for depression, and I will be the rest of my life. I'm so glad that I found that. I mean, my son and my mother took their own lives. I mean, I'm right in the middle of this, right? So I'm happily treated for depression the rest of my life. After my husband died, I realized that I was now living in this valley between menopause and death. And this is where I was. And I had to try to figure this out. I was alone for the first time in my life. I got married at 19. I was married for 44 years. And I didn't know what to do with myself. And I found that I was not alone. There are a lot of widows out there and widowers that find they're in that same situation. I also tried to get some help, figure out what am I supposed to do. We don't really get training on this. So I started researching what to do, how to leave a legacy. I started researching death and dying, and I became a death doula. The research and all of the information I learned, I just decided to put into a book. And my book has 3 parts. The first part is leaving a legacy. I realized that over my life, I've had the opportunity to meet amazing people with amazing legacies, and I wanted to write about them. The second part was on death and dying. With my training as a death doula, I wanted to talk about what happens when we die and to try to help destigmatize or rethink death. And then the last part was a workbook to help our children manage after we go. And I realized that the first thing we need to do is get all of our affairs in order, all those practical affairs, wills, trusts, healthcare directives, all of those things need to be done. I hadn't really thought about that before. Then I realized that, wait a minute, they also need emotional help after we go. So I started writing about leaving legacy letters, legacy love letters, reconciliation letters for people that you need to reconcile with. We need to get our emotional affairs in order before we die, so that we can leave our children in a better state, leave them stronger, leave them more resilient. And that's what the book's about. Well, your legacy is every interaction you have with every person you come in contact with. So if you start your day thinking about what legacy I'm going to leave, and you start your interactions with people thinking about what legacy I'm going to leave, that's the best way to get started, because you want to leave a good legacy. And I'll give you a good example. When I first started thinking about this, I found myself in Kansas City in a Chipotle store. My daughter was running to get food for her family, and we were in a hurry, and I was in Chipotle trying to get through quickly. And the woman in front of me was the customer from hell. She was just asking these questions to this poor young 17, 18-year-old man behind her. And she was accusing him of things and saying that they should have had this or should have had that. And he was trying to manage the situation and manage it well. In the meantime, the line was backing up because this was taking quite a bit of time. And I was starting to get a little bit irritated because, I had a schedule to keep. And as in his kind of concern about this woman, this young man looked up at me just for a second. And I have to say that if I was not thinking about living with my legacy in mind, I probably would have gone like, oh, I would have expressed irritation. But that's not what that poor young guy needed. He was managing this very well. And so when he looked at me, because I had that thought in mind, I went like, you're doing good. And you would not believe the look. I mean, I get goosebumps talking about the look that he gave me back, the look of relief that he gave back to me. So that made his day, made my day. And then eventually she was still there. She was probably there 15 minutes. I mean, this was really tough. And she was there, and somebody from the back, saw the long line and came out and helped me. And when I got to the register, I said, that young man down there is doing an excellent job managing the situation. I just whispered that. I said, please tell that manager. And so it made his day, and it made the manager. So just with that little change of thought from being exasperated to just going, hey, you're doing, he's doing a good job. He's doing the best job he can. Made a difference in my life, his life, and everybody else's. And it was just something little. That's a tiny thing. But life is full of tiny things. It's full of tiny interactions. And I think if we live with those tiny interactions in mind and how we can change the way people think or feel, we're living our legacy. And it's the wonderful thing is it's a win-win. It's a win-win for the person that we're helping, but it comes back to us as a win as well. So that's living with legacy. And the more you do that, the more you try to leave positive impressions throughout your life, you have left an amazing legacy. And anybody can do it. You don't have to win a Nobel Peace Prize or win a Pulitzer. Every person can leave an amazing legacy. All of us know people that have died and have left families that were unprepared for their death, not only financially, but emotionally. We all know the problems that occur if you don't do a will or a trust, and then the state gets it, and it might not turn out the way you want it to. And sometimes families engage in a conflict over the way things were managed. It's also important that you prepare them emotionally, that you have a plan for after you die, that you prepare them, you make sure they know, okay, at some point in time, I'm going to go, I'm going to be gone, and you need to be ready for that. That involves many times having a family discussion beforehand, which is a hard thing to do, but very, very critical to have that discussion before you go. First of all, alerting to them, and hey, at some point I'm going to be gone, and this is what I'd like to have done at that time. And by the way, I love all of you. So, you have to throw that in every time. Well, we have to confront death. We live in a death-denying culture, so we have to confront death. And unfortunately, I think in America, we tend to have a thought that perhaps if we just ate the right food and we exercise, we would just live forever. We know that's not the case, but we kind of have that in our mind. We need to face that time is coming, and it could happen at any time. I know I'm in the fourth quarter of my life because I can do the math, but others who are younger could be in the fourth quarter of their life. We just buried my 52-year-old niece who had cancer, so that can happen anytime. We need to prepare for that, and we need to understand that death itself is not something to be afraid of. And I think many times there are many people that fear that. In fact, if you look around the world, people have different views of death. And we need to just look at them, look at our view, no matter what you believe, take a look at that and make sure you're prepared for that inevitability. Well, the first thing you need to do is have a family conversation about what's going to happen after you die. Your family members need to know where all your information is going to be. They need to know what your plans are, and they need to talk about it because it's going to happen at some point in time. Now, I even talk about this to my grandchildren because they were so devastated after the loss of my husband. And I know they're going to grieve when I go, but I want them to be strong. I want them to be resilient. So I've talked about the time that I'm going to be gone too, and that I want them to be happy, I want them to be joyful. Now, I know this works because a few months ago, my little granddaughter Heidi came up to me when I was sitting at the kitchen table, and she said, Nana. And I said, yes, Heidi? She said, well, if what happens to Pop-Pop happens to you. And I said, you mean if I were to die? She goes, yeah, Nana, if you were to die. And I said, yes, Heidi, if I were to die, what do you want to know? She said, well, Nana, if you were to die, can we still go to Disney World? And I said, yes, you can go to Disney World. I want you to go to Disney World. In fact, I'm going to pay for you to go to Disney World after I'm gone to celebrate my life. And so I talked to my daughters, who are both attorneys and who have my will, to put a clause in my will that we take a certain amount of money to use for a trip for my daughters and my grandchildren, because I want them to know that the way they honor me after I die is to be happy, joyful, and resilient. My kids, when I die, know that everything they need is in this binder. All the information is in this one book. So instead of having to go through all my drawers and to try to find everything, they know where this book is located. It's in a safe. They know the combination. They just go and get this. And so my belief is that as they're going through this book after I die and just knowing everything is right here, they're going to say, oh, my mom really loved me because she took the time to put this together. That's what I hope. Now, you never can be sure about these things. So just to make sure, as they're going through this book, they're going to find the love letters in there. And then they're going to be sure that I loved them, because I'm going to tell them that even after I die. So this legacy binder, this is a gift. This is a gift of love to your family after you die that says, I love you and I want you to be resilient and I want you to move forward after I die. Well, I just developed a course called Last Minute Legacy Love After Life Blueprint. And it's designed to teach people through videos and through an online course, step by step by step, the things necessary to get this book put together, and give some additional information, and also just helps, again, the focus of this is to show your love even when you're gone. And I'm really excited about it. It's been a lot of fun. I've had to learn a lot of new techniques because it's all online, and so it's been good for me as well. The Love After Life Blueprint is a perfect complement to the book because it shows in a more step-by-step manner exactly what you need to do to get all of those things done. So it goes over in a more detailed fashion. How do you have a discussion with your family? Let's take a look at the 4 steps to have a discussion with the family. So it complements the book and allows people to get started at the beginning of the course and go through it step by step. And at the end of the course, they have their finished legacy binder and they're all ready to go. All they need is just to update it once a year. So it just helps. It helps people have some accountability to get this done through a step by step manner, because the biggest reason people don't do this is procrastination, because we think we have more time, but you never know. We don't know if we have more time. So the course allows people to get started on it in a 4-week time period. They should have their legacy binder all put together. I would like my readers to know that the number one thing they can do is to live every single moment with their legacy in mind and leave their family the gift of emotional wealth.